Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa. I'm doing a presentation today, and it's going to deal on case in point of boundaries and transgressors. I wanted to give a story from the life of Prophet Muhammad, particularly a companion. It's going to deal with a domestic issue, but we can take these lessons and expand on this understanding elsewhere. It's not just at this domestic, but sometimes it helps for us to emotionally detach from a understanding or a concept that I'm trying to bring about, so that when we look at it into our own lives and reflect on it, we can do so without kind of like getting defensive about it. This deals with actually a noble companion. Her name is Khawlah bint. And there is a chapter titled after her, Al-Mujadala, or the woman who argued. She was the one who argued with Prophet Muhammad upon peace and blessings. And it dealt with that she was married to another companion. His name is Aus ibn al-Samit. And I don't want to go in details about their marital issues, but there was, if you will, a problem, a marital problem, that resulted in her becoming divorced, given an utterance that at the time was meant that she was divorced from her husband. Systematic social ill in society that impacted her life, and it's going to cause, if you will, serious social problems for her. And she took her complaint to Prophet Muhammad upon him peace and blessings. I mentioned before in various videos about relationships and rules. And I explained at the time that rules without relationships create rebellion in society, and relationships without rules create chaos, darkness, such as societal problems. So here we have, for example, let's start with the relationship between these two companions, given societal social ill that has impacted their marriage. I don't know if you recall, like when you go to, I don't know about you, but for me, let me just share something with you. Screen. This way. Okay. So it says, like you see here, it says site health check. I'm just showing you like a part in my website. If you go, for example, to a doctor, you do a physical annual test, and they do these type of tests to check and see the health of your body. They'll check like different organs. There are certain indicators that tells you, something is not passing the tests of what is the correct range from this, this number to that number. If you ever went through an annual, they do a certain number of tests that they check to see certain organs, vital organs, and they tell you if something is out of range, like it did not pass the test. Similarly, like if you go online, I'm looking here, just give you a kind of a visual view, is you'll see like it'll tell you about the site health check. So it's called the site health status of your site. And so it'll run tests about all the things that need to be in place accurately, and it'll let you know if it passed. So it'll give you a test and say, okay, these passed the tests. It's the same, if you will, with relationships. The very first thing that you have to do when you are trying to solve a relationship, whether it's a domestic relationship, a social relationship, an international relationship, you have to check. You have to have indicators that tell you, that check the health, as a health check on that relationship. Is that relationship healthy? What are indicators of a healthy relationship? And you have to first do a health check on that relationship. You don't just come in, just start putting rules, coming in with lots of bombs and just start bombing the place, into smithereens, thinking that now you're going to make this a healthy relationship. You have to first check to see, is the relationship healthy? Identify indicators of what makes a relationship healthy between either two nations, between two people, between two groups. Like, what are the indicators? What are the identifying indicators that we have to recognize, that we have to check before we start to establish rules? We have to check and see, is that relationship healthy or not? We have to address those health issues of the relationship, or violations, if you will, or in this case, if something is not performing accurately, you have to then fix that, to fix the relationship or to fix your body or whatever it is. You have to first do a health check, to check and see, how is that relationship? And I mentioned that because, again, the next issue is, if you have a relationship but you don't have rules, like everything is just do as you want, you don't have any rules, then you can have, again, societal problems, chaos can rule. You can have an elite class which becomes like a mafia, and it's running the world like a mafia. You can have very, very, if you will, serious problems in society. So again, rules without relationship create rebellion, but also relationship without rules create chaos, darkness, societal problems. Let me just take you to my my document. And I'm starting here about the woman who complained. Now, it's a cultural tradition, as I said, it's a societal illness that was very disrespectful to women, that had impacted their marriage. For brevity, I will not go into the details, because I don't think that part was that important, as much as how the Prophet responded to this particular situation. Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, could only give her what he knew and practiced. So he told her to be patient. Now you have to, again, I always say the swallow first test. This is how he lived his life. He was an orphan, and he lived and dealt with a lot of trials and tribulations by being patient and listening and turning to God. This is his, you always give others what you give yourself. So he was not trying to give her something where some people say be patient, but they themselves in their own lives, they're not patient. Then you have an issue to complain about. Why is he telling her just be patient? But he himself lived his life by being patient. And as I mentioned recently, patience requires love of God. Patience requires love of God. To be able to be patient with God's decree, you have to have that very strong love relationship with God. And we know that nobody loved God at a human level more than Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings. So his patience was great because his love for God was great. In any case, he's also known to be forbearing, and he did not say, okay, because she wanted to, she was arguing with him. So she said that she's going to take her argument to God, because he could not recognize the situation is pretty big, in that now he's dealing with a social illness in society, that for he to say something on her behalf is going to actually cause a major social impact And maybe people at that time were not ready possibly to receive it. So he could not just sort of take things and do things on his own, nor did he like come on the defense of her husband. But another thing that was important was he didn't say, go find me all the dirt you can on Khawlah, just so that I could defend my decision or defend what I told her, which is to be patient. He just remained silent, and she says she will take her complaint or argument to God. Again, it's important to note how he responded. And at times we will face situations in our lives where our faith is going to be shaken, and we will need to turn to God for strength as well as for an opening from him to help us deal with an issue that is very great in society. Like the relationship, as I began, is just not healthy. There's an illness that needs to be addressed, and he did not have, the green light as a prophet, because his station was a prophet of God, to speak on behalf of God, not permission and consent. So one of the descriptions of Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, is he does not speak out of desire. He does not just speak on behalf of God, turn to his ego and say, God said this, and God said that, God said this, God. Unless he receives revelation from God, he does not speak on behalf of God out of desire or by turning to his ego. So that was very, very important to note. Now, I mentioned the issue of extroverts and introverts because sometimes how we deal with issues is very differently. Sometimes also, like extroverts will like to talk about it. It makes them feel energized. It makes them feel happy. Whereas introverts will like to think about it. And that makes them feel more maybe in control of the problem than extroverts feel. So each one, again, has a weakness and a strength, But the way that Khawlah again responded was she said she's going to take her complaint to God. She was not going to go to the woman and sit down, talk about this issue, or was she going to go and talk about it with herself, try to figure out how to, again, turning to the ego, where she's going to try to think what is the best way to resolve. She went straight to God, seeking help from God, complaining that this is the situation that she's in and that she is facing, and it is impacting her family, and she needed an answer. The one thing that I'd like to address in this, and why I like this particular story of Prophet Muhammad, was it dealt with the importance of, at times, again, when we're dealing with an unhealthy relationship in society, and you have these indicators that tell you this relationship is not healthy, you have a responsibility in society to then address the security concerns, address the health issue concerns of the relationship first, to make sure that the relationship is healthy before you start establishing rules. And that's also, again, between the relation between us and God, between the relationship between us and others as well. So here you could tell that people experience in various forms, to various degrees, trials, and that there was a boundary that needed to be created in that particular time to end an oppression that was impacting women's lives. So God sent down revelation to Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, in her defense. Language was bold, it was firm, it was strong, and what's important here was a big penalty was prescribed for such behaviors. How you feel about it, whether you cried or not, are irrelevant. The world doesn't revolve around your tears and your feelings. Her rights were restored. The man was penalized. A social ill was called out boldly and strongly. A community was educated. The powerless and helpless felt relieved. Now it opens another door for conversation on healing, reconciliation, and trust. Now I'm speaking this as a domestic issue. So I'm not in any way like telling people in Gaza who are dealing with the genocide, you need to now go into reconciliation and healing with Israelis. That is absolutely not what I am implying. I'm speaking again about this particular case, but for us to understand about rules and relationship, and then how it's very important to check the health check of that relationship first and see if it's a healthy relationship. And if it's not, that there are necessary boundaries, necessary penalties that need to be applied to try to, first and foremost, make that relationship pass a health test. So Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, told her, let him release a slave. He didn't just tell her to forgive and just, don't hold grudges and remember that these times when he was good to you. Because sometimes when people are solving problems, this is literally what they give you as a solution. Try to tell, remember when he did this or he said this. They're not understanding that the relationship is not healthy. You have to first fix the health. You have to run some indicators, some health checks. You have to identify what those health checks are. I'm not going to give it to you all here in this video, but you have to have that knowledge of what makes a healthy relationship. Do that health check and see, is this a healthy relationship? Then address those violations first of that unhealthy relationship. So here, the solution, again, was not to give nice words about forgiveness and love and throwing, came down with a penalty upon her husband. Let him release a slave. I want to mention that when we are slaves to our ego, unknowingly, maybe unintentionally, we make others slave to us by compulsion. Let me say it again. When we are slaves to our ego, we unintentionally, unknowingly make others slaves by compulsion. So slave is not in Islam just deals with individuals who are, for example, Black, and now it's all over because people realize you cannot take them as slaves. Slavery will actually exist throughout our lives, and it can take many different types of manifestations, which I will not go into here. Of course, the greatest one was what African Americans or Black people have faced. But slave can be somebody, again, who, if you saw the response of one of the Israeli leaders after October 7th, there's no food, no water, no electricity, no fuel. Basically, you have complete control over another human being, such that they rely and they depend on you to live or die. So they become your slave. So that becomes a slave under you. So you could, if you look at it, when you become a slave to your ego, then you make others a slave by compulsion. Here you're a slave to your ego by choice, but in doing so, you make others slaves by compulsion to whatever it is you want to hold them a slave to. That is a lot of, if you'll notice, a lot of violations in Islamic law. If you study Islamic law, it creates that psychological I want to say like kind of destruction or decolonization in the mind, where it sends a message that when you are worshiping your ego, you are impacting another human being. There's someone else that is being impacted. So usually the remedy is to free another human being from being a slave. It may be various types, as I said, of slavery now mentioned here, but you have to go actively and look at freeing as a way of amending a relationship that you have with God. Because now that relationship is no longer healthy because he's displeased and angry based on your actions. You have to fix that relationship. And it's not as simple as saying, I love you, God, everything's okay. And then, remember when I prayed for you? I'm still praying now. No, there's a violation that took place, a penalty that needs to be, you need to be charged with and you need to fulfill. Now she responds to Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings. He does not have the means to do that. Again, but at the psychological level, being that we're all humans, we all fall into certain violations. One of the things that people had to deal with, and Muslims, was you had to go actively to resolve these issues. You had to go and actively free slaves. You had to actively find somebody and free a slave. And again, it created that psychological understanding of you're freeing a slave not out of charity, you're freeing a slave to free yourself from being a slave to your ego by choice. So it immediately created that association of when we are slaves to our ego, we hold other people slaves by compulsion. And so it created that awareness, if you will, mentally, emotionally, psychologically in people's mind. So it was always like as a way to make amends and fix that relationship between you and God, is you had to free a slave. Now notice he's speaking with her and he's giving her agency to be empowered. He's not like speaking about her without her, or he's speaking and she's so involved in resolving and being very empowered in resolving the complaint that she had raised, the argument that she had raised about the situation. So you see her as somebody who has full agency in the situation. This gets me to a lot of peacemaking that we want to do. We don't involve the people that supposedly we want to help. We are speaking about them, for them, but we're not speaking directly to them, giving them full agency to be involved in the decision making and having power to resolve the situation. So one of the things that is beautiful about this story is you could see that she has full agency, very empowered in the peacemaking and the solution that is taking place. It's not like she's being overpowered, but she is empowered, you could see, and she has full agency in the decision making of how the situation is going to be healed. So the Prophet, upon him peace and blessings, then said, well, then let him fast for 2 consecutive months. Again, it's the issue of being, when you are a slave to your ego by choice, you also have not learned self-restraint. There are no red lines. Maybe it's a societal ill, but you've embraced it. But that societal ill has taught you there is no association now where you are going to be able to learn self-restraint. When you are going to fast for 2 consecutive months, it can be exhausting after 2 months. So if you also have not went through a 2 consecutive months fast, you probably are not doing Islam right. It's not just about making sugar-coated comments, sugar-coated this and that. You have to actively be, if you are really, trying to be better Muslim, then you have to have actively went through that process of fulfilling these things, because you're a human being. There's no way that you could have walked on earth without somehow, having a violation. So you have to have been fulfilling these type of penalties, and to teach yourself, and to, again, put in your mind an awareness of being a slave to the ego by choice enslaves another by compulsion, but also the importance of learning self-restraint. And she said, he's an old man, he's not able to do that. Now, who's defending her husband? She's defending him. He's not engaging in self-defense, if you will. There is no self-defense here. She's empowered. She's the victim. This is another thing that we learn about when you are trying to solve a problem, is the victim voice and narrative should be emerging. Again, the victim's voice and narrative, decision-making should be also empowered. You should see that in the story. You're supposed to be looking, is that there? You could see that, and when the Prophet is helping people, that those individuals who are victimized, you see them having full agency, you see them speaking, you see them also involved in decision-making, and you see she's the one who's actually defending her husband. He's not actually engaged in self-defense response. Then the Prophet tells her, then let him feed 60 poor people. Again, food insecurity is also a form of slavery, because if we applied the way God had prescribed his laws, the spirit that he prescribed his laws, there would not be poor people on earth. If we prescribed and applied the laws of God the way he sent them down to be applied in that spirit, there would not be poor people on earth. But again, the penalty is to feed 60 poor people. So this violation required him being cognizant of, again, that this behavior impacts society. This behavior that he's engaged in has an impact on society, because it would have led, for example, to her marriage breakdown, to be a single parent, have to take care of kids all on her own, and maybe find it difficult to find a job. But these are all, if you listen to the stories of people who are poor, these are some of the stories of people who are, for example, poor. There's others, but this is sort of the ways of being cognizant of actions that you take. Don't just impact you. They do have a domino effect and impact others, and they also impact society. She responds, "Oh, Messenger of Allah, he does not have that much." Again, you could see her being empowered. And here she's, again, defending him. So the Prophet says, then we will help him. Then we will help him, meaning the community will help him. The important issue here is he did not say, well, okay, then we'll forgive or waive the penalty, because the penalty has to be taken care of. And if he's not able to fulfill it, then the community has to fulfill it. Because this was a community illness that has impacted his marriage, and more than likely is impacting others. And now the community is being educated. Not just that recognize what happened between Khawlah and her husband was wrong, but this is going to impact you financially if you are, for example, having locker room talk or in sermons or whatever, engaging in this type of rhetoric that may contribute to this type of harm to a relationship. you will be responsible for them paying the penalty fee. You will be responsible to amend the relationship between you and God, or that person and God. You as a community will be responsible to pay that penalty fee. So it became not just the husband had to pay, but it went all the way down to where the community has to pay. And as I said, the weak always follow the strong. So it meant that those who are capable of paying, they need to understand that you are responsible for making sure this social illness is eliminated in society, because you are going to be responsible for paying the penalty fees, because it will usually impacts the poor much more than it impacts other areas. And so this now became a community education program. And so she says that she will also give in charity on his behalf. Now she's also again empowered to be involved in that decision making. All of this is by her own choice. You can see there's no compulsion. He's not asking her to do anything. He's not asking her to defend her husband. He's not telling her what to say. She's doing it out of her own will. Why is this important? God is most wise, and he knows what's behind our arguments and our complaints. Again, this is a domestic issue. This is not telling people facing genocide how to deal with their problems. I'm just giving a story from the companions' lives that I felt was very beneficial for us to reflect on about rules and relationship, and doing a health check in a relationship, and the importance of red lines, indictments, penalties, charging, the transgressor. And if the transgressor is not able to fulfill that penalty, ensuring that the community has to fulfill that penalty on their behalf. At times, we spend hours talking and projecting our conjured ideas and sharing our feelings, but we do not hear or listen to a word said. Boundaries are set firmly to help us listen to and hear our inner souls. At times, behind anger are love and feelings of not being needed or of worthlessness. Here I'm addressing this particular story. I might be wrong, but this is how I understood it. While she came to complain about her husband, this is the starting point, she ended up pleading with the Prophet regarding the big penalty, and went from complaining to contributing to the penalty fee. See that process, by giving her agency, allowing her voice to emerge, allowing her to discover her own voice and her own feelings and her own needs as well. So the Prophet did not psychoanalyze her based on the social ills, conjured ideas, or prejudice towards women at the time. He did not blame her or belittle her pain or suffering, but called her to what he practiced himself. The revelation that came down was healing and nurturing. And again, it's not just words. There were penalties, there were boundaries placed, there were health checks of the relationship that God was able to immediately call out certain things and remove and address at the societal level. Not just for her husband, again, but for the whole community. Through the dialogue with the Prophet, she was made to discover, without the Prophet shoving it down her face, like defending her husband in front of her. He didn't defend. You notice that? He didn't defend. She's the one who was defending. Because imagine if you're abused, you're being violated, and someone is sitting here defending the person who violated or transgressed upon you. That is very abusive. You're coming here saying, well, Israel is doing self-defense, and you're saying, look at this genocide. Well, Israel is doing self-defense. That is very harmful, very hurtful, very abusive. He does not, in fact, if you look at it, the beauty of that, he does not, in fact, speak on behalf of her husband. He's not acting like his public defender. She's actually the one who recognizes that now he has to pay a big penalty. And she's the one who's trying to come on his behalf and explain that her husband is old, poor, and sick. And so the Prophet, through that dialogue and that restorative justice process, helped her discover that on her own. He helped her to hear herself. She knew that, but because of the way her husband was acting or reacting out of that need or feelings of being worthless or feelings of not being needed, that he was taking it out on her. And so he helped her to discover that out of her own. It wasn't shoved on in her face. Her husband's actions, again, probably feelings of worthless and not needed. He discovered her feelings, her husband, of genuine love for him. As I said, patience requires love. Patience requires love, because we can only be patient with people we love. We can only be patient with God's decree if we love God. That's why it's important to nurture a relationship of love with God, because when things happen that are outside of our understanding, or they may shake our world, our love of God will drive us to him, and they can help us to be patient. For you, if you can kind of like work with me for kind of like the dawn, the darkest hour before the dawn, to start to come to the zenith of the sun, start to like slowly, as we have seen through that story, unfold where that relationship can be healed. The community also learned the importance of respecting women in general. The way the Prophet, again, not turn into a public defender defending her husband, or try to find like dirt on her. And you see that a lot in any situation where there is like two individuals or a community issue takes place or domestic issue takes place. They'll go and they'll find like every dirt they can find, and as a way to sort of justify whatever abuse and whatever transgression they would like to justify. But he remained silent. We also saw again her having agency and power in the decision making, as well as the penalty. How wanting to be also contributing to the penalty fee out of her own volition, not compulsion. So women and the helpless learn to take their complaints to God if they were not heard or understood. It doesn't mean that we cannot do things in the community, but it is such that war will take place. And one of the biggest, as we are seeing right now in Gaza, and we have probably seen in Iraq and other areas, the biggest victims of war are women and children. And during wars, as we all know, the worst amongst us will be like violating every like law that they have put in place with total, disregard for the women and children, how this is going to impact them, how this is going to harm them. And in that situation, it's not to say that it's not going to impact men. We are seeing the elderly and the weak and others are also being impacted. But the amount of harm, because they're not able to defend and protect themselves in certain situations like rape, that to turn to God, who's all hearing and all knowing, and to seek protection from him. It may be that God will use them, as he has used Khawlah, to educate the entire community and create an opening and to remove a social ill from society. As God opened doors for everyone to listen to what they need to hear. More importantly, Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, as I said, did not respond some psychologists, here I'm referring to Jordan Peterson, or teachers of religion, and if you hear where they start to, by turning to their ego, they come with all sorts of spiritual abuse, using his position to dehumanize another human being. He does not speak out of desire. So he didn't come up with some sort of cocktail snake oil treatment and, forge God's name, nor did he, like some charlatans who pose as psychologists, start to defend the indefensible, as Jordan Peterson did by trying to legitimize Netanyahu before even October 7th. So they trying to come up by trying to make him sound like he's this sane, healthy man, and that the community, people should accept him. Prophet did not do either of those things. He did not try to rationalize and justify abuse. He listened. He did not have the necessary revelation from God sent down at the time to respond. So he remained silent, and he gave her the medicine that he himself swallows, told her to be patient. It's very important for us to reflect on this, because a lot of issues that we have to deal with, if you ever listen to sermons, or if you listen, like I said, to Jordan Peterson, it all boils down to he said, she said, he said, she said, he said, she said, he said, she said. But you could see that there's no boundaries. And boundaries are different than walls. Walls, like, the wall that Israel built, walls are built to protect one group at the insecurity of another. Boundaries aim for something different. Boundaries about mutual security for both. That I need you to be secure from me, but then I also need to be secure from you. Boundaries are about mutual security. You recognize where those boundaries are placed. You have a right to be secure from me, or I have a right to be secure. Walls are about the security of one at the expense of the insecurity of another. Again, the security of one at the end of the insecurity of another. And when walls come into place. Walls come into place because one party, whenever they violate and transgress, there's no penalty. There's no penalty. There's no penalty. There's no penalty. So as the Quran describes them, they become kind of defending themselves behind a fortress or a wall. All their cries are behind a wall. It's like all they care about is their own security. They become such a slave to their ego that everybody on the other side of the wall is a slave by compulsion, fearing their threats, fearing their destruction, and fearing their violence. They have built a wall that just protects just them, while keeping everybody on the other side of the wall in complete, total fear of their violations and their transgressions. So something for us to reflect on, the importance of such a situation, indictment, sanctions, and penalties when we resolve problems, not just when they get really, really, really bad, like it becomes a genocide. Genocides don't just happen overnight. One day you're all good and the next day genocide happens. Genocides happen in one party has been over time transgressing and then got away, transgressing again and got away, transgressing again and got away. And the more they got away, and the more they got away, and the more they got away, it got to the point where now you have this fortress of wall that protects them, because they have become so enslaved to their ego that everybody around them is enslaved by compulsion. This is how walls are built. So it's important for us, I can't really like give you the best solution for a situation of that nature when it gets like to that point. I think individuals, when they descend to the lowest of the low, I think it's essential to bring them to the Hague, because they have reached a point of, and society has reached a point where it's essential that they are brought to the Hague. Cannot resolve such a relationship. But what the lesson we can take is, before it gets to that point, that those who are trying to make peace have to do a health check, and they have to at times prescribe penalties, and they have to prescribe, again, anytime there's a transgression, and they have to recognize what's a transgression in that particular relationship. It's different from one relationship to the next, that penalties have to be prescribed, and the person cannot fulfill the penalty. The community around that person has to fulfill that penalty. So imagine if the Israeli society, every time Israel transgressed, had to pay a penalty. Imagine if they kept paying a penalty for all the times and all their transgressions the past 100 years. We would probably have seen boundaries between Palestinians and Israelis and a healthy coexistence taking place. But every time they transgressed, every time people were killed, every time Palestinian was shot, imprisoned, tortured, killed, imprisoned, shot, Israelis got away. Israelis kept getting away. And so they descended to the lowest of the low of human existence. This is by their own choice. Nobody pushed them there. They made a decision that they prefer to escape accountability. Her husband, for example, in this particular situation, there's another case that I have of individuals where, it's in a later chapter, where the individual was charged, but he did not avoid accountability. He had to go attend to some issue, but he came back, but he refused to avoid accountability. But here, it's that you have a habit and a pattern where someone continually avoids accountability. This is harmful, not just to themselves, but is harmful to everybody around them, as we are witnessing right now. So I would like you to extract lessons, not to go on a tangent and make assumptions or conjecture that this is aimed at anyone personally. Those that are like maybe aimed at, I did mention their names. I hope you can reflect on it, that when we are solving problems in our community, that we have to at times reflect and see if a penalty needs to be applied, and if self-restraint measures need to be applied, and if feeding 60 people need to be applied. These sermons need to be starting to, if you will, go, like pop up and bubble up in our community. It's no longer just forgive and don't hold grudges and love each other. You have to do a health check on the relationship, and you have to heal at times the relationship by placing boundaries and penalties on the transgressor. I hope this was beneficial. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.